If you're going to buy another MSP, you're likely to find plenty of content around the deal structure and how much the other MSP is worth, and all of those types of conversations. But you're going to find much less about the actual integration of that other MSP. Well, that's what we're talking about today. Today we are talking all about the integration of one MSP to another. When you buy another MSP and you get them into your business, right? And that's what we're talking about today. My name is Adam Hammond. Welcome to Ramblings of a Geek. I've been in the MSP space for the better part of a couple of decades, and I've seen plenty of different integrations and different mergers and acquisitions happen. Some went well, some didn't go so well. I've been a project manager on a big one, and I've advised a number of other folks on others as well. So let's get into how you can set your acquisition up for success today. I believe the integration is much more difficult than the deal-making process. The deal-making process is fairly straightforward. The problem with the integration is that there's lots of variables with the people, there's lots of variables with all the different processes you're going to deal with, and there's cultures, all these things that have to happen, right? So there's things that make integration difficult. And so one of the things I'm hoping to do with this video today is make it a little bit less difficult to kind of navigate those waters, because it can be murky at times. So let's get into a number of different things. When I think about an acquisition, there's a couple things I would want to consider before pulling the trigger on the deal. Now, I'm not saying don't do the deal if these things aren't in perfect alignment, but at least you want to think about it and understand what some of the challenges you might run into are based on a couple things. So the first thing is all about the size and maturity level of the acquired company, right? If you're acquiring an MSP that is similarly sized to you or a similar business maturity, it's going to require you to do a lot more negotiation and conversation around the different processes and stuff than, say, if you were to buy a 1 or 2 person MSP that's much smaller than you. Because if you're buying a smaller MSP where they're, like less than half of your size, you pretty much are going to come in and say, all right, this is how we do things, and this is how we're going to move forward, right? And you're pretty much going to kind of move them along, integrate them into the culture and all that stuff, and you're off and running. But if you're going to acquire an MSP that's similar to your size, and especially if they're quite similar to your size, if the MSP that you're acquiring is 70, 80% the size of yours, you're probably going to have some conversations on which processes are going to win. Do you need to do some new processes because now you're quite a bit larger of a company? So there's some things to think about based on the size and maturity level of both organizations. The second piece is you want to think about their culture a little bit, because again, you're not going to tank the deal because the cultures are mismatched. But if there's a wide disparity between the cultures, you want to address it during the integration process, because if you don't, you're just a miss on your part. So if the cultures are quite a bit different, be mindful of it and address it. That's the important piece. And the third piece is all about what your expectations are from both a client and a employee attrition rate based on the integration, right? A lot of times what happens is you buy an MSP and it's very turbulent for a number of folks, and it's turbulent for both clients and employees. So you are very likely to lose some of each. So you want to think about what that looks like, what good looks like for you, what you're hoping to see, and then build your plan around trying to make sure that you minimize the attrition on both the client and employee side as much as you possibly can, because it's just an important thing to think about ahead of time. Because if you wait until you're in the middle of it and or your messaging is weird or anything like that, you're more likely to lose more clients and more employees. Before I get any further, I do want to mention that this is very much a conversation around you are buying another MSP and you're going to make one solid MSP out of it. You're not buying another MSP that's in a different market, or you're going to run completely separately, because those things require a little bit different care and a little bit different processes. So I'm really talking about the merging of 2 MSPs to become one MSP at this point. If you're getting some value out of this video, please click that like and subscribe button. It really does help me understand the content you guys are looking for and that is bringing value to you. And if you've been through an integration or some mergers and acquisitions before, drop a comment below with your experience as well. I'd love to have a conversation about that as well. So when I think about the process and getting into the nitty-gritty of doing an integration, the first thing you need is a project manager, someone to own the integration process. And that person needs to be able to do a number of things. They need to be able to manage projects. They need to be able to understand the business side of the MSP a little bit. And they need to be able to negotiate and talk through things and communicate clearly. If they have those 3 skills, you're probably doing all right. And the reason why you need somebody managing this is because somebody must own it. Because if nobody owns it, or if it's a shared responsibility, things aren't going to go so well. I've seen plenty of integrations where it was someone's like quarter-time job to run the thing, and the results were what you'd expect, not very good, right? It needs to be someone's, in my opinion, full-time or most of their time job to run the integration. Now, if you're going to buy an MSP that is like 2 people, the time it takes is going to be shorter, and you can get through that process faster, but it still should be someone's job to work their way through that and make sure those things are happening, because the more ambiguity and the longer the whole thing takes, the more likely you are to lose more clients and the more likely you are to lose more employees. So you want to execute on this quickly and have it be someone's focus. Now, if you're going to buy an MSP that's quite a bit larger, then obviously it's going to take a lot more time, and it's going to require that person to really move a lot of different pieces forward. So let's get into the different pieces that you want to move forward, and this is really true for all size of integration, but in particular when you have multiple employees, more than 1 or 2, this gets a little bit bigger as well. All right, so you need to build an integration plan. What should be included? Well, the first thing is you need to have a good communication plan. You need to communicate with the clients and you need to communicate with your employees, right? It's really important that you have both of those things well in hand and have some thought around what that's going to look like, what the messaging is, and make sure people are all marching in the same direction as well. So the communication plan is the first piece that's really important. The second piece is you need to have a really good HR plan in place, especially if there's multiple employees at the acquired MSP, because you need to get them integrated into your company, get them on your benefits. All of those things are really important, so you have to have that plan as well. You also need to have a client onboarding plan, right? How are you going to get all of the clients from the acquired MSP into the new solidified MSP? Like, what does that look like? You also need a financial plan. How are you going to merge your finances together? How are you going to make sure you have enough cash on hand, and all of the different pieces that are going to go into that? And there's lots of nitty-gritty that gets into that. Then you need a plan around all the different tools, right? How are you going to merge your PSAs together? How are you going to merge your RMM? And like, what's the stack migration look like? All of those pieces that live there, you're going to have that. And we'll get into that here in a few minutes. And then, of course, you have to have a cultural merger plan, right? You need to merge the cultures together. You can't have an us versus them, because the more you have an us versus them, you're going to lose employees on either or both sides. So you want to merge those cultures together as quickly and as sanely as possible, but you want to make sure you absolutely have a plan for it. When it comes to trying to merge 2 companies together, there are quite a few things to consider when you build out your plan. So let's talk about how I would formulate an integration plan, especially if you're going to do this on a regular basis, right? If you're going to do a one-off integration, it's probably, you can kind of feel your way through it a lot of the way. But if you're going to do this as a growth strategy, I would strongly recommend that you build a process and you just kind of repeat that process over and over and over again. So let's get into kind of how I would formulate a plan if it was me today. The first thing is I would have a rock solid communication plan. I'd want to communicate well with my clients and communicate well with my employees, right? I want to talk about employees, this is what you can expect, and this is the benefit of why we're merging together, and this is the benefit to everybody, not just one side or the other, right? And you want to make sure that is well communicated and obvious to everybody. You also want to communicate to the employees that you're acquiring what their benefits are going to look like and what their pay is going to look like, and what all of those different pieces that kind of go into that. Make sure you have that put together as well. When it comes to the client side of the world, you want to make sure that you're communicating with the existing clients on both sides, right? On the acquired side, you are going to tell them, this is who we are, this is what the process looks like, this is the next steps, and this is why we're both excited. We should both be excited, right? We're excited to meet you and get to know you and to have you as a client, and here are some things that we're bringing to the table that are going to benefit you, right? Make it largely about what's going to benefit them with the integration, because you want them to be excited for this, or at least not apprehensive about it anyway. The second piece is you want to communicate with your existing clients on the acquiring side, right? The clients that aren't going to see any major changes. Let them know that, hey, you're doing some stuff, you're growing, you've added some new faces to the team, and we're excited about this, and like just kind of make sure they understand what's going on. And again, you're trying to set the tone and really explain what's happening. And when you have that communication plan put together, you're in a much better spot, because you want to communicate clearly on all of the different fronts. And the more you can do to do this well, the better off everyone's going to be. Then the next thing is you want to have an HR related plan. Like, what does it look like to bring everybody on board? Now, in many cases, when you acquire another MSP or acquire another small business, the employees that are being acquired basically get fired from the old one and get hired to the new one. Like, that's pretty normal. This might be an area where I might bring an employment lawyer in just to make sure you're not like stepping into a minefield somewhere, and to make sure that you're not potentially going to cause yourself some heartburn on the back end. But for the most part, that's typically what happens. But you want to make sure, again, to use that communication plan that you've already created, to then execute on the moving all of the employees over. That's a really important piece. The next plan to think about is all about the financials of it all, right? Thinking about the financial plans and thinking about how much cash you need to have on hand, what's your run rate, all of those different things is really important. Now, there's a few things that come to mind when I think about the financial plan. One, you want to talk to somebody who is much more in depth with your finances and has a better plan for all of that. Two, is you want to make sure you have enough cash on hand. Make sure you understand what your daily run rate is, and make sure you extrapolate that over time. Make sure that you have enough cash to in the bank to deal with all of the different pieces. Because really, that's just part of the conversation, right? Is you want to make sure you have an idea around where all your money lives, where all the cash sits, how much cash you need to leave in the business, how much, like all of those pieces. But you also want to have conversations and plans around how to merge your financial packages together, how the bank accounts are going to work together, and how you're going to move those things over. Also, things like vendor accounts, right? How do your vendors handle when you acquire another company, right? Do they have a process for it? What happens to any lines of credit that live out there that kind of live in that vendor space, right? Also, lines of credit with your bank accounts, right? What happens there? I've seen a couple different times where an MSP that acquired another MSP ran into some cash flow challenges and then struggled to get some lines of credit because things got auto closed because of the merger, right? So think about all of those things ahead of time and have a plan for that in your integration plan. In addition to all these different videos I also do a monthly newsletter. In the newsletter, I talk a little bit more about what's going on in my world, what I'm seeing in the industry, and links to some things that I think might be valuable. So if you're interested in the newsletter, go ahead and grab the link down in the description of this video. Then we want to think about tools and process and what does that look like, because this is where a lot of the work comes into play. A lot of the heavy lifting and things, this might actually take some time to get into the place. Because when we think about tools and process, and frankly I'll throw documentation in there as well, is that when you build out the plan to migrate your tools together, build the other process together, and do documentation, do all of those things, and then ultimately kind of client onboarding, that can take some time. So there's a few things to think about here. The first piece is, and I'm going to take a minute to talk about your PSA, because presuming you have a PSA and you use it pretty well, and the acquired company has a PSA, you're going to want to merge some of that data together. Now, many people go, well, I want to merge all the data together because it's really important that we have all this stuff. I think that's false. I think you should think about only moving over the data that you really need. And in my opinion, that's like three things. What your client data, who your clients are, the contacts at the clients, that's also really important, and then their contracts. How do you build them? What does that look like? And make sure that those three things are rock solid. If you do those three things and nothing else, you're probably doing okay. The second piece of this is I would probably move over any open projects, especially if the project is in flight. Although if the project is pretty much close to being done, I might just finish it on the old PSA and not worry about that so much, and maybe just send an invoice out of the new one. And any existing tickets that live out there. Now, I've had plenty of conversations with MSPs that really wanted to move all their ticket data over. I've also talked to a number of MSPs that have spent tens of thousands of dollars moving the ticket data over. I don't think I've had anybody that says, hey, that was worth the time and effort, right? Usually that's not worth the time and the effort. So I would recommend that you draw a line in the sand and say any new tickets after day X get opened on the new system, and any tickets that are still lingering from the old system, once they get closed, then they're gone, and then you move on. Any real long-running tickets, you all have them, right? You have a ticket that's open for a year because some random thing is going on. I might move that ticket over and call it good, but I would not wholesale pay to have someone move your ticket data over, and I would certainly not do it yourself. That is way more effort than it's worth. My strong recommendation is to move over the data that you need to have, put the old system in sort of a read-only mode, and have a license or two access to it. And then over time, you use the system less and less and less, and eventually you just shut it off, right? That is what I would really recommend. And you'd have to really have a good reason to want to move all of that stuff over. There'd have to be like obvious benefit. If you can't make it an obvious benefit to you and be able to enumerate what that is, I would probably not do it. Then let's talk about the rest of the tool set, right? Your RMM, your stack stuff, your documentation, all of those other pieces that kind of go into all of this stuff, right? So the first thing is is you want to build out what a good plan looks like for merging all of this stuff together. Ultimately, you want to have one stack, one RMM, one set of tools to manage all of those merged clients. So build out what that's going to look like on a per client basis, and then extrapolate that across your client base. And that's going to tell you kind of how long it's going to take to get through all of that work. And that's going to really come into play when you think about maybe re-onboarding all of the clients on the acquired side of the world. So what does it take to move the RMM stuff over? What's the licensing going to look like? All that stuff. What's it going to take to remove the old stack stuff and put your new stack stuff on? What's the client experience going to be like for all those kind of things? Those are important things to think about. And then how is it going to look to move all the documentation over, right? And think about what that looks like. Build out what those steps are going to be on a per client basis, because that then tells you how long it's going to take you to do on every individual client, and then extrapolate that out for times number of clients, and then obviously add some buffer because nothing is going to go exactly perfectly. One of the most important pieces of this tools and process integration is documentation. You want to get your documentation down to a single spot as quickly as you possibly can. The longer you have multiple different spots for documentation purposes, the more likely you are to have a situation where people are like, I don't know where this is, and they just don't even look, right? And I'll actually throw a video up above that links to one of my earlier conversations around documentation and processes and stuff, because you want to make sure that you have that well in hand. When it comes to documentation, get that integrated as quickly as you possibly can. Do lots of QC as you migrate clients over. Make sure someone's taking a look at the different client documentation. Make sure it's accurate, that you're not missing things and those kinds of pieces. But make sure you have a solid documentation migration plan as well. Once you have the tool components put together, then you can start kind of moving those clients over on an individual basis, or maybe do a couple at a time. And whatever that plan is, do a couple. Get the clients moved over, communicate well with the clients, make sure the client knows what to expect, learn from what doesn't go quite so perfectly well, so that way you communicate better with the next set of clients, and rinse and repeat all the way through until all the clients are over. And this is where you want to get 100% complete, right? This is not one of those opportunities where you get 80% done and go, good enough, and you move on, right? You really want to get this all the way done. So you have a tool plan put together, you know how you're going to migrate your clients over. Then it's really important to address the culture plan. The culture migration, culture integration plan is really important. If you happen to be acquiring another MSP in your same market, it's a little bit more straightforward because you can be face-to-face pretty easily. If you're acquiring an MSP that is in a different market, in a different state, in a different country, in whatever, it becomes a little bit more logistically challenging because you have to then address all of those pieces. So, a couple of things to think about. One, if you're in person, I would do as many in-person events as you can stomach and as you can get through, because getting FaceTime with the broader team is really important, and have reasons to talk with each other. And you might have to manufacture some of those reasons, but make sure they're talking to each other to a degree, because it's important. If you are remote, right? If the two staffs are separated by a pretty sizable geographic region, then I would do a couple different things. One, I'd plan for a face-to-face at some point, whatever that looks like. Make sure that you have a budget for it and all that stuff. But the second piece is have some sort of video interaction, one-on-one, many-on-one, send people back and forth. Like, have a really solid plan for how to really get the people to know each other, because once they know each other, they're going to realize that they're not that much different, and that you could build a better team structure out of it. Now, one thing that I've seen work well is to have one employee from each side interview the employees from, like, cross-interview employees, and save those videos in a spot where the whole team can see them, and really make that be part of that kind of that culture integration plan, where you actually are like getting to know each other with some icebreaker questions. Like, what's your favorite movie? If you could go anywhere on vacation, where would it be? What would your favorite superpower be? Or what, like, if you have a superpower today, what would that look like? Like, those kinds of questions. Nothing real difficult, nothing, more than a softball. But the idea is you start to get to know each other a little bit that way as well. Ultimately, I think you really want to head towards the idea of having built shared core values, right? Each side of the company very likely has core values. How would you merge those core values together? What does it mean for this new larger company? Like, what does it look like? How are you able to merge those things together and make sure that everybody speaks the same language? Now, if you are acquiring a 1 or 2 person company, it's probably a whole lot simpler than if you acquire someone who's 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 employees, right? So think about that a little bit too, but make sure that you're thinking about those shared core values along the way. Now, when you think about this integration plan, and you want to kind of shortcut your way there, you can certainly head over to my website. I actually will have a version of a plan that I think will work well for you. And I've used it in a number of different situations, and so feel free to grab it and use it in your business if that's a thing that you're hoping for. All right, so you have your plan figured out. Maybe you grab mine, whatever that looks like. Now it's time to execute. Well, there are some pitfalls you might run into when you're trying to execute this plan. So let's talk about those for a minute. The first one is sometimes, and frankly many times, MSPs get to about 80% of the way done and they stop, or they get sidetracked and they're doing other things, and that can cause some challenges, right? So speaking as a person who routinely gets to 80% and says, good enough, and moves on, you really want to get these integrations done all the way to completion, because it's just really important that you don't have like half-done integrations, especially if you're going to do them over and over and over again, right? I've talked to plenty of MSPs that have done multiple acquisitions, and they are 80% of the way done with about 5, right? And it's just a mess. Don't do that. Don't do that to your team. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to your clients. So get your integration all the way through to completion. That's going to be the first step, is really make sure you wrap that thing up. The second challenge might be what I call negotiation overload. This is really prevalent when you are merging two similar sized MSPs together where they both have ideas about the different processes and which process is going to win. And you can get stuck in the weeds trying to talk through every single process out there. My recommendation would be get to good enough for now, and then build out what an upgraded longer term plan is going to be. If you do that and you do that well, you're going to be fine. The reality is that if you over negotiate and you think about all this stuff for too long, you get back to the 80% problem because you never get it all the way through. The third piece is you may have some employees that don't understand why this integration, why this acquisition is important, and why it's good for the company and all those things. You need to be able to describe why this acquisition makes sense for everybody. When you can do that well, you will very likely have less resistance from your staff. But I've seen plenty of times where there was not obvious benefit to everybody involved, and there was some people working against the process a little bit. So be mindful of that. You may run into a situation where an employee doesn't see the benefit and they work against the process a little bit. I've seen it in a number of different areas. So just be mindful of that as you're working right through the whole process. One of the more important pieces of all of this is when you're all done, what does success look like, right? Success looks like a couple different things in my opinion. The first thing is, what's your client attrition and your employee attrition? What does that look like? What did you hit your targets, right? I would try to aim at 80 to 90% retention of both employees and clients. And frankly, it's a little bit of a shot in the dark. You're not, especially if this is the first one you're going to do, you have no idea what you're likely going to hit. But the idea is you want to aim at something and then gauge how you did against that. You also want to make sure that you're building your plan to minimize the amount of loss on both the client and the employee side of the world. Understand that ahead of time and then gauge how you did based on what your expectations were. The second piece is the project done? Did you get your project all the way through to 100%? Is that done, and can you move on? That's the second piece. But ultimately, the thing that you're paying attention to and your thing that you want to manage the best or the most is your EBITDA and your gross margins, right? After the merger, after the acquisition, what does it look like with your gross margin? What were you expecting? Is it still good? Is it better than it was before? Is it worse than it was before? And figure those things out. Once you figure out your gross margin, then think about your EBITDA and make sure that those things are in line and that you have a plan to correct any issues that have arisen from the acquisition, right? Those are important pieces to think about. It may take a little while for that to level off, especially if you're going to go through a whole re-onboarding of all the clients you've acquired, because that's time intensive and that can eat some hours with your clients. I think it's a smart thing to do though, if you especially the key clients, to make sure that you're doing that well and that you've given them the TLC, because again, that's going to reduce that client attrition rate anyway. So that gross margin EBITDA might lag behind a little bit, but if you do this well and you execute on the plan well, you're going to see it come back to where you expected it to be, and ideally even better than it was before. Integration is the make or break phase of any kind of acquisition. So it's really important that you plan early and you build that plan all the way out. You execute consistently and you communicate often, right? If you communicate well and you execute on that plan, you're much more likely to see success at the end of the day. If you'd like to take a look at my one-on-one video, I'm going to drop it up here. And that's a really important thing to think about as it comes to the HR integration thing side of the world, is make sure that you're having good one-on-ones after the integration as well. That's an important piece. I'm also going to throw a playlist up here for a brand new podcast I'm recording with my friend Natalie. She and I spend all of our time talking to MSPs throughout our day jobs, and we talk a lot about all the things that we're learning and talking about in that podcast as well. Thanks for coming on this ramble with me, and hope to see you on the next one.